and thank you all for coming tonight. I am Terry Gilman, the owner of Creating Conversations. Tonight's program is the 6th in our series called Creating Conversations with Literary Women, and it is made possible because of the support and partnership of the Literary Women of Long Beach. I also want you to know that your attendance and book purchases tonight and in past programs have helped sustain our small independent business over the last 16 months. So thank you. Tonight, Pam Atherton will be in conversation with Paula McLain, and they will be talking about her latest book and her first mystery, When the Stars Go Dark. I want to now turn the program over to Barbara Wild, the chair of Literary Women, who will introduce tonight's guests.
Thanks, Terry. I'd like to say thank you all for taking the time and choosing to be with us tonight as we pursue our mission of celebrating contemporary women authors and bringing their variety of genres to the community. In past times, our efforts have centered around an in-person festival, and we are on track to bring that back this coming March of 2022. Please check out our website for specifics and updates at www.literarywomen.org. The 2021 Digital Collaborative of Creating Conversations with Literary Women author presentations are supported in part by a grant from the Arts Council of Long Beach, as well as the City of Long Beach. And we're honored for their support of this evening's event with author Paula McLain and radio personality Pamela Atherton as they discuss Paula's new novel, When the Stars Go Dark. And if you haven't read it yet, you're going to be engrossed in a thriller to beat all. For those who have joined our digital presentations in the past, Pam is a familiar face to you, and you probably already appreciate her extraordinary talent at bringing the best out of the conversations that we have with our guests. She engages in a multitude of endeavors. She's known as a broadcast journalist, a radio talk show host, a media strategist, a keynote speaker, and I guess you understand by this time, she is the true professional, and we are very lucky to have her. And so I'm going to stop and let Pam take over at this point. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Barbara. And I am always, as always, thrilled to be a part of something that the Literary Women of Long Beach and Creating Conversations puts together. And there's a little bit of housekeeping before we start this new way to connect. And who knows, I mean, with the pandemic coming to a close, hopefully, maybe we'll continue with some of these in addition to the live event. Who knows? We keep we keep hoping for that. Here's the housekeeping before we start. First of all, feel free to leave some comments in the chat area, in the chat box. That's where you'll find links to purchase the book, ebook, audio book, coupon codes, how to get past books of Paula's. So keep checking that chat box. Your questions, and we will take questions at the end, go in the Q&A box. That's the only place that we'll take questions from. And the last 15 minutes or so is when we will take your questions for Paula. We are not going to respond. You probably see at the bottom a raise hand function that we don't go along with that. We just comment or chat with the others in the chat box and keep the conversation going. Now, if you don't have a book, you can get one from Terry at the at Creating Conversations website. And she just told me, I want to make sure I get this correctly, that you can also get a signed book plate. For those of you who purchased a general admission ticket, you're going to get a $5 credit towards the purchase of any title from Paula McLain as kind of like a thank you for attending tonight. And there's a code, and that'll be in the chat box for you. You'll get a signed book plate available on a first come, first served basis. And if you've already purchased When the Stars Go Dark, you would like a book plate, then you would email Lauren at Creating Conversations, and Lauren will put that email address in the chat box. And so we are excited today to have this conversation with Paula. Also, to let you know, there will be an email that comes after the event. So there's additional information and links and information about both organizations in that. And you can also sign up for one of the newsletters if you don't have them from either Creating Conversations or from Literary Women. This is a live event. There will be dogs barking. There will be cats walking across keyboards. There's going to be doorbell ringings. Who knows? It's a live event, and that's part of the fun of it. Tonight, we are looking forward to having a great conversation and a whole lot of laughs with Paula McLain. Now, is there anyone here who has not read The Paris Wife? It's a best-selling book, and it is a stunning historical novel that took on the bigger-than-life Ernest Hemingway and his first wife, Hadley Richardson. And it's a book that became a runaway hit. And of course, it also made sure that we were familiar with the name Paula McLain, an author of several best-selling historical novels, such as Circling the Sun and Love and Ruin. Paula took a turn into the world of detective mystery thriller fiction with her latest book, When the Stars Go Dark. And whoopee, she gave us a female detective. So the story and the detective, Anna Hart, hit kind of close to home for Paula. Tonight, we're going to find out why and how. We'll learn what made her change her genre and writing gears, what challenges in her own life are infused into the book. Plus, of course, we're going to find out what her secrets are for writing. So I am just thrilled to welcome her as our guest tonight, Paula McLain. We're so glad that you're spending some time with us.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you so much to Literary Women and Creating Conversations. And yeah, looking forward to this.
So the first thing I have to do is, because I'm notorious for giving spoilers, is if you can give us a little roundup of what the book is about for those who have not purchased it yet, because I would tell the ending.
So it's a literary thriller set in the 1990s involving a seasoned missing persons detective, Anna Hart, who is based in San Francisco. And when terrible tragedy strikes her personal life, she flees her job and her family and returns to the place that she considers to be home for her, which is Mendocino, California, even though, like myself, Anna grew up in foster care and had a lot of dislocation and displacement. But she flees home, and when she arrives there, instead of having space to heal and reset, she finds out that almost immediately a local teenage girl has vanished, and she becomes irrevocably swept up in the case and the mystery and in the connection between the deep, profound connection between herself and the victim, but also herself and victims at large, which is her obsession. And yeah, that's the book. And it also has real life crimes. You know, I've been surfing this line between fact and fiction for some time. So that's another element of the book that some people might want to know. Yeah.
Indeed, you have. And I mean, you've had these huge successes with The Paris Wife and Love and Ruin and Circling the Sun. What brought you to the decision to change gears to the directive?
Madness. Irrationality. Menopause. No. You know, I don't make rational decisions. I'm a really intuitive person. And when an idea comes, I kind of like to think that I invite the possibility of it as an idea, regardless of like where it came from or if it's my genre. But when I had the idea for this book, I was actually I was in the second year of working on Love and Ruin, which is set in at the beginning of the book, at least, is set in the Spanish Civil War, and it goes all the way through the 30s and 40s, and it concerns Martha Gellhorn and Ernest Hemingway. And, you know, she's a war correspondent and a badass. And when, you know, that book begins, she's in Madrid in 1937, you know, and the whole city is under siege, surrounded on three sides by Franco's army. And that's where I was in my imagination one day working on a scene. And yet when I walked my dog, long walk, because she's a very, very energetic doggy, this character flashed onto the screen of my mind. And sometimes it feels like going to the movies, you know, and a long walk can do that. A long car ride can do it. Um, and you know, here comes this character, this missing persons detective. And, you know, by the time I got home, I kind of could see the whole world of it. And I knew exactly where it was going to be set, but I had no intention of writing that book. I was in the middle of another book. And, you know, what do I know about writing suspense? That, you know, it's this whole different genre with all these different conventions. But when I finished Love and Ruin and was sort of casting about for things to write next, I had lunch with my agent and I said, so don't kill me. I've had this crazy, crazy idea. And I just thought she'd tell me I was a whack ball and to move on and go back to what I was known for and actually having a pretty successful career as.
Yeah.
And instead she said, that sounds amazing. I bet you'd be wonderful at that.
Did that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, because here you are thinking she'll stop me. I won't have to.
Yes.
Why not?
She's
And then
not going to let me just plunge right over the cliff. Right.
Yeah. So knowing that you were going to go this direction, did you start researching detective novels and authors that you liked and styles?
That's a great question. So I'm really superstitious. And when I had the idea for The Paris Wife in 2008, at that time I had published 2 collections of poetry and memoir about growing up in foster care and a contemporary novel. And when this idea came absolutely out of nowhere, I hadn't read any historical novels. And I do still credit that with some of the, not the success of the book, but kind of the originality of the book. I didn't know what I was doing. And sometimes not knowing what we're doing can be a great gift and give us a great sense of freedom, that anything can happen within the sphere of the book because we don't have these voices in our heads saying it should be this way or it should be that way. And so when I had this idea, it kind of felt similarly. It came from nowhere. I hadn't ever thought I would work in the genre. And I didn't read, you know, I don't read suspense, nor, like I said, did I read historical fiction. And so I thought, I want to protect the purity of the idea. And I want to surrender to that. And so aside from the books I had already read that I consider kind of my benchmark, you know, if I was ever going to write a thriller, I would want them to be like this. Besides those books, and for me, those books are like Tana French, Into the Woods. I don't know if you know Tana French's work, lyrical, atmospheric, very character driven. I love Kate Atkinson, particularly the Case Histories series, and Louise Penny, the Canadian mystery writer, who really writes not just about deep character and these larger than life, you know, themes of that about humanity and what it means to be human, but she also focuses on a village, a very small village where the characters in the town become characters in the stories. And so were sort of my my council of elders, if you will, as I plunged ahead. But other than that, no, I didn't. I decided not to read deeply.
Just to start it from your own, right? You're going to make it up as you go along.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, how much of this character is you? How much of Anna?
You know, every book there's a Venn diagram, right? If you think about, and this is true for every writer, but if you think about Hadley Richardson, say, you know, that's not her voice speaking The Paris Wife. It's that place where I meet her across time and space, the place where I've, intimately reimagined her. And even an entirely fictional character has the author inside of that character. But it's intriguing to me, Pam, that this is the first time in a dozen years that I decided to write straight up fiction without a biographical anchor point, you know, the historical facts on record to provide this infrastructure for my story. It's like the ceiling was off, anything could happen. And lo and behold, I ended up writing a character who had a lot in common with me. And maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I was surprised that when I began to reach for details in Anna's backstory, not her front story, I'm not a detective, right? But in her backstory, what she's carrying, what she's wrestling with, her regrets, her everything, what she thinks, what she obsesses over, that's quite close to me, actually. Yeah.
So was there the subconscious that was like, you need to write this book because
I
there's
think
stuff that has to.
so. No, I really think so. I think sometimes, and I'm a huge believer in the subconscious. I don't know if you are. Sometimes I think our subconscious mind is the most interesting thing about us, and it has messages for us. I mean, if you believe in dreams, Jungian theory, depth psychology, all of that stuff, I believe it. And even if you don't believe it, you have to admit dreams are interesting, and where our minds go when we let them. The imagination is so absolutely fascinating. And what I found as I kind of grew deeper and deeper into the book is that here was a perfect opportunity, because I didn't have to have this fidelity to a time frame, to biography, to history, that I could give her anything, everything. I could give her all of my obsessions, right? I could give her my fascination with trauma and healing, my deep interest in victimhood and how we become victims in the first place, and how we can stop being that. Can we ever is healing possible? Can we recover from severe trauma? And then if so, what would that take and what would it mean? And
Was it
all of
more
that.
freeing or was it more frightening to not have boundaries?
You ask really good questions. You really do. Was it freeing or frightening? It was both at the same time. When you take the ceiling off, when you go out over the edge of the cliff, and I would say that as women, we know something about this, don't we? Like risk. When we take big risks, those are the opportunities for growth. And yet it doesn't mean that we're not sort of having a white knuckle ride, right? It's both. It's both. Georgia O'Keeffe said, I was afraid every day of my life, but I did it anyway, right? Or Eleanor Roosevelt, we must do those things we cannot do. Like, those are the voices in my head. I want to be that kind of woman. I want to take big risks.
When you were excavating all of this to create this character, were there times when you went digging that you were like, oh, that's a little too painful, I don't want to go there?
Yeah, yes, but it wasn't in the realm of the personal. It wasn't the kind of psychic excavation work that ended up being a little too hot to handle. It was the research that I was doing. So my work has always been really steeped in research, and research is freaking fun. It's like really fun. I consider it continuing education. It's the way that I continue to learn about the world and all kinds of things, absinthe and bullfighting, and what it means to be a racehorse trainer in Kenya in the 1920s, and all of this. It's fascinating. But this time I needed to learn about true crime. And I wasn't quite prepared when I went looking to kind of give Anna's voice a veracity, a real authority and conviction. She's a missing persons expert. Like, she really has to know her business and to live it and breathe it. And when I started doing reading, then in that regard, I had a lot of nightmares, I really did. I had a lot of nightmares when I was confronted with these horrible stories, and I didn't have a lot of distance from them, and probably because of the way they, triggered me, but also exposed me to this raw and the darker side of human nature. And the true crime, or the historical aspects of the book, were a surprise to me. I didn't know when I first set out to write this book that I was going to be including real life crimes and victims. But I originally set the book in 2016, and I was 3/4 the way through the first draft, and I figured out that I didn't want to deal with a bunch of FBI agents in rooms talking about, blood spatter patterns and all of the stuff that we are really familiar with if we watch a lot of crime TV, right? CSI kinds of stuff where somebody opens a laptop and know exactly who the murderer is. And number one, those characters are never wrong. And of course, fictional characters have to be wrong if they're going to be identifiable. But the surprising part, and I'll just say this because I think it's important what we were saying about the subconscious having its own agenda. I set the book in 1993 as just a random thing. It's a fluke, like before DNA, before the internet, and before criminal profiling, before cell phones. I thought this is going to be great. And the minute I did that, when I was doing research one day, I ended up listening to a podcast between two retired FBI agents, and one was interviewing the other, and it was Eddie Fryer, who was the lead detective on the Polycloss case.
Yeah.
And she was abducted on October 1st, 1993 in Petaluma, which is 10 days and 60 miles from my imaginary girl and the town of Mendocino. And I got that feeling that you get, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I thought, this doesn't seem to be a fluke. This doesn't seem to be an accident. Maybe I'm meant to continue to do this, surf this line, as I said, between fact and fiction, and not just to tell the truth, but to really honor the lives of the victims and dignify the deaths and the suffering that their families endured.
And I think to make them real as well. We hear numbers. We say so many children are abducted, so many children, but there's no story. We need to hear the story to make it real.
Yes. And I think that, my favorite review so far said something to that effect. It was like, in this novel, there are no convenient victims, meaning they're not there simply to further a plot line. And when I was doing this research, as I said, and maybe one of the reasons, Pam, that I was so unsettled was because a lot of these books and, Mind Hunter, et cetera, really do seem to fetishize the criminal mind, the psychopathic mind, or the sociopathic mind. And I think we're fascinated because it's just so odd. We think, how could this possibly happen? What does it take to create such a monster? And yet in those books, the victims are also often just thumbnail sketches. And I found myself hungry for those stories. I really wanted to know what happened before. Who was this person? Just a name. What was their story? What happened before they met this person? How did they launch on that particular course? And those obsessions, those questions I gave to Anna,
And I think that fits in with something you told in the book, which I had never heard before, but makes total sense. Not only did you give us facts and figures of how often this kind of stuff happens, but you talked about the term bat signal. Explain that to us, because then we now will understand more about the victims.
Yes. So bat signal in the book. And when you asked earlier how much of Anna is me, so here's a really good example of how much of Anna is me. I, a couple of years ago, was invited to do a book club with a lot of lovely women at Miraval in Tucson. And of course I said yes right away, because who doesn't want to go to Miraval? I mean, just absolutely amazing. And so instead of, having a fee as authors, we got spa services. So instead of having a seaweed wrap or a facial, I'm born and raised in California. I wanted to, have my tarot cards read and talk to whatever healer and all of that kind of stuff. And so I saw a trauma therapist, and I had been doing a lot of work on my own recovery for a long time, my own psychic recovery for a long time. and healing from wounds of my childhood. But this guy really blew my mind, and I didn't know what to expect. He has worked with 100,000 trauma victims. He was there at 9/11, Oklahoma City bombings, and heard a lot of stories. And there I am in a room kind of telling my story and my childhood and how old I was when my parents left and how many homes we were in and what kinds of abuse happened, etc. And he stopped me at one point and he's like, so here's the thing. Every person gets spit into the world with a bright light, and that's the soul, and it's pure and bright and untainted. Everyone gets a clean slate at birth. And yet for some, 1 in 4, 1 in 7, some say trauma occurs, violence, abuse, abandonment, great loss, trauma. And then for those children, it's like tar is over that soul. And when the light shines through, it creates a bat signal. And these are his words, every narcissistic, alcoholic, piece of shit bastard sees this light and comes running. And these two recognize each other. And Pam, he was talking about me. He was talking about my bat signal. And what he was really saying is the work of my life is to figure out how to remove that tar so that I can really move on, right?
How to clean your light.
Yeah, how to clean my light. And particularly those of us who struggle with the way that the past informs the present. And I've written about this too, about the way developmental trauma, for instance, impacts romantic relationships, that we seem to be choosing partners and situations that are like being sort of strapped to a great wheel, or like Sisyphus, pushing the same rock up the hill, over and over again, trying to resolve it, right? But how can we really do work unless we're 100% conscious of all of it, to bring all of it to the surface and to look really closely at it? So the bat signal, I gave this to Anna. I have it verbatim in a conversation between Anna and Will, who is the town sheriff in Mendocino, and their childhood friends. And they're sitting there, and I didn't know I was going to do it. I have them in a bar talking about victimhood and talking about who could have taken this girl and why. And suddenly Anna starts giving Will this bat signal theory, and she does it because she learns that Cameron was adopted. Now, not all adopted children have trauma, but Anna, as someone who grew up in foster care, who has a lot of things she had to survive, right, just understands that maybe they share some emotional DNA. Maybe they do. And that maybe Cameron has a bat signal, and that this is what called danger into her life.
And when you talk about that, I want to move into your experience of this, because so many of us have no concept of the good and the bad of foster care. We don't deal with it. So how would we know? And we
Right.
need you to help us to understand this.
Sure.
If you will, starting with your own experience.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So I grew up in Fresno, California, one of 3 children, girls. And when I was 4 years old, and my mother was 25 and had 3 children under 6, she took us to my paternal grandmother's house, and said she was going to the movies, and that she'd be back in the morning, and she never came back. And nobody knew where she was, in fact, and no one ever talked about her again. No one ever mentioned her name, said where she was, if she was living or dead, or where she had gone, or she was a black hole. She just essentially vanished into thin air. My father was in prison at the time. He was always in and out of prison, a very violent man who with a drug addiction, and he was in prison at the time. And when he came back, he took us to the courthouse in Fresno County, and we waited in the hall while he signed his name to a bunch of papers and surrendered us to the foster care system. And we waited in various kinship placements with family members, sleeping on relatives' floors essentially for months while we waited for our first placement. But from that moment on, from the time I was 4 until I aged out of the system at 18, we were wards of the court. So only in Fresno County and from home to home to home. First of all, every kid, right? Every kid endures some sort of uncertainty, but just the idea that your parents could just kind of go to the movies and not come back, or to vanish into thin air, or that your father would suddenly not be your father. And then, the social worker kind of drives you to somebody's house, strangers' houses, and says, this is your new family, and then kind of drives away. It's a very, very odd experience. Sometimes I say childhood was like war, and we were child soldiers kind of overnight and didn't know how to get out of that particular story. So just the system itself was a problem. I mean, it was, the abandonment and the uncertainty and the dislocation and the displacement and the fear. But then within those homes, there was abuse and violence, and so things to survive from day one, which added so repetitive and continued trauma. So
I mean, to me, the sense of no sense of permanency for a child has got to be so frightening.
Yeah, I've written about it too, Pam, and I've written about it this way. I said in my memoir, it was almost like it was all being lent, right? The furniture and the clothes, like library books, right? The toothbrush, none of it belonged to us. The home that we lived in, the things that I think we often take for granted as children, that the home you're born into is yours and you belong there, and you don't have to ask for something, everything, anything, new shoes or something to eat, for instance, or affection, right? It's a really thorny, complicated way to grow up. And I know that there are foster parents who are noble and fine human beings. I myself did not have any of those. I mean, I didn't experience that.
How did you, when you became aware of it, what did you notice about that affected you as an adult?
As an adult.
Relationships and your,
Yeah.
bored things. Did you know what I'm saying?
Oh, you mean how did I cope?
Well, did you see that you took some of that fear and that uncertainty with you into your adulthood and
Oh,
manifest?
yes. I mean, for sure I did. But the first thing I did was just buried it all, the way that we do when things are far too complicated or tricky or painful, or right, is that we shove it down and hope it goes away. What I took into adulthood was guardedness and constant vigilance, trust issues, attachment issues, PTSD, right? Yeah, my nervous system, I'm learning in adulthood, is just completely out of whack from a constant, waiting for something bad to happen, and a certainty that it will, it's just a matter of time.
So there are two things I want to ask, and of course I want them to be what you think. It may not be a scientific answer or whatever, but one, if you could fix the foster system, what would you do?
Yeah. I had a really interesting conversation the other day with the writer Renee Denfield, who is a suspense writer, who's a beautiful writer. She's based in Portland, and she has two literary thrillers. One's called The Child Finder and one's called The Butterfly Girl. Renee herself is a foster parent, but she also was a victim of human trafficking when she was a kid and grew up on the streets in Oregon, and has had a really rough go of it. And she's turned herself around. It was just so fascinating to talk to her because we share all of these connections, but somebody in the audience asked something about resilience, right? And she had the most beautiful answer to it, just kind of a fierce firecracker answer. She's like, we're always talking about resilience and how to grow more of it. But really what I want us to focus on is how we can keep people, particularly children, from having to develop it. You know, let's have them survive less, right?
Right.
And I think when I really, I mean, obviously, you know, I'm not a policymaker. When I really look at the damage of my childhood, it seemed to me to begin far before I entered the foster care system. And it had something to do with not feeling as if I had any value. You know, if I'm given away, right,
Right.
there must be something terribly wrong with me. And then if I'm given away again and again and again, well, the jury has weighed in and the verdict is that I'm not worth
You're
keeping.
worthless. Yeah.
Right? That was the message the universe seemed to be giving me. And so that feeling of not being enough, of not being worthy of love and belonging and just a safe place is not just my experience. This is where victimhood starts, right?
Right.
Is by not having those what we consider to be basic human needs met in sort of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Shelter and right love, like that's pretty far down the pyramid, and yet it's fundamental to our sense of wholeness
Yeah.
as humans. And that was not even on the menu for me.
Yeah.
So it's been a real process. I'm 55. I feel like sometimes I'm just getting started, right?
Well,
Doing
yeah,
work.
but something like your book allows us to understand better what is going on, because so many of us have nothing to do with it. So we would not even understand this is going on. And to add to your trauma, you were sexually abused. So it
Right.
wasn't just not having a home or a sense of permanency or someone to love you. The people you were supposed to trust betrayed you.
Exactly. And the people who were supposed to be, right, the safe, the caregivers,
Right.
right, the shelter. Yes, we were placed in a home with the sexual predator. And I honestly believe that the wife was aware of what was happening. And I don't think it was the first time it had happened. I don't think we were the first, my sisters and I were the first victims. Um, and yeah, it's a horrible um, set of circumstances, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, at any age, but you know, I was 5, so
Yeah.
yeah.
There is so much more to this. And that reminds me, are we going to see more Anna Hart? By the way, Anna Hart, right? Come on, what a
Yeah,
name.
I know, I know. I'd like to think we're going to see more of her. I can tell you that I'm really invested in her as a character and invested in this world. I love this world. I love all the people in it. You know, I spent a lot of time deeply enmeshed in their lives. I think about them. I care about them. It was really wildly fun to write her. She's, in a way, a perfect protagonist, like I said, because I found myself able to give her so much. I will say quickly that my research also involved making a connection with a real detective, a detective who read drafts of the novel and really gave me a lot of very important feedback. But what I found so flattering over time, Pam, is that she became obsessed with Anna too, and started to think of her as a real person. And this detective might as well have been my character. You know, she came up in the 1990s, like Anna, as a detective, and you know, dealing with sensitive crimes. And one day she called me. She had been out for a bike ride, and she came home like all excited. She's like, I was just riding my bike and thinking about Anna, and I've decided she has more work to do in the world.
Well, there you go. You were looking for a sign, and there it is.
I know, and there it is. She has more work to do in the world.
Good. All right. So I want to switch gears a little bit here because many of the people who attend are either writers or aspiring writers or just love to know about writers. So I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. The first I always ask is, are you a plotter or a panster? Meaning, do you plot out what you're going to write, or do you go by the seat of your pants?
I go by the seat of my pants for sure, or by the seat of my subconscious. Yeah, really intuitive, impressionistic. I feel my way forward. I have a voice and I start to trust it. I believe that, you know, when you're writing a book, you have no idea what's happening or should have any idea what's happening, that you feel your way along kind of.
Your characters sometimes start telling you what they're going to do.
Do they? Yeah, if I'm lucky, they do. If I'm lucky, they do. I feel like all I can do is just keep pouring the words in and loving the book. And at a certain moment, the tide shifts and the book seems to start loving me back. That's the way it feels.
So how long does it take to write a book? I mean, you've got the historical novels and then you've got this. Give us some timeline.
Yeah, but the historical novels are very different book to book. You know, it took me 5 years to write my first novel. It's a contemporary novel. It's called A Ticket to Ride. My kids were really young then, and I had an hour a day to write it because my husband worked all the time and I had these young kids at home. So I wrote The Paris Wife because I quit my job and wrote in a Starbucks near my house in Cleveland and wrote my face off. And I wrote The Paris Wife in 7 months.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
But then it took me 2.5 years to write Love and Ruin, and somewhere in the middle for Circling the Sun. I think it just depends. You know, The Paris Wife was like a rocket ship, right? Just really felt like it kind of broke through the sound barrier.
How about this one? How long did this one take you?
Yeah, almost, yeah, 2 years, I think, door to door. But that was a lot of drafts, Pam, a lot of drafts. There was a lot to learn and a lot of humility.
Yeah, there was a learning curve, I'm sure.
Yeah, the learning curve is very, very steep. There was a lot, yeah, there was a lot to familiarize myself with in terms of the conventions of the genre.
Tell us about your writing schedule. Do you have a specific discipline that you have?
Yes, in a perfect world, although all bets are off during COVID, right? Because my kids were home. So my kids now are 14, 16, and 28. So one is launched and married and living in Denver, but the two at home were home a lot during COVID. But in a perfect world, they go to school. I mean, just the magic of that they leave, my house is quiet, and that I can, you know, carve out this quiet time between, say, 9 and 3. And that's my job. I'm very proletariat about it. I sit in the chair, but in the chair, I don't make lunch dates with friends. I don't get my teeth cleaned. I don't call my mother. I definitely, I don't go shoe shopping. I work. And that discipline is, it's my saving grace. It's like, I believe it. I believe I need to show up for my work, that I've made it a promise. Ernest Hemingway counted his words every day. And somewhere along the line, when I was working on The Paris Wife and learned that, I started writing down my word count every day. And I collect them on little slips of paper. And then I don't throw the paper away.
It's like your little
And
money.
that, it's very superstitious. It's sort of devotional. I'll tell you what else I do. I light a candle when
What's it,
I'm at my desk, even
what's
when I'm
the-
doing an event like this. Yeah,
what
I
smell?
light a candle as a way to kind of create the ritual, right? And um, to set an intention, like this is, I'm working now.
What smell do you like?
I like no smell at all. Or I like rich people smells, like bergamot
Lovely.
and
And
grapefruit. And you walk
persistent.
into those really nice hotels. I like that. I like it to smell whatever.
Like
Linen.
Lady Spa. All right.
Yes. Oh, I know. Yeah.
We'll do questions and answers now. So let's see what we have here.
Okay.
Were your siblings in the same, oh, this is from Toby Schaefer. Were your siblings in the same foster home, care homes with you?
Yes, it's very rare, in fact. And we didn't know how rare until later. But yes, we were always in the same homes. And every once in a while, our social worker would say, if we don't find you a home soon, you're going to have to go to the group home, basically the orphanage.
Was that like a fear thing they did to you?
Yeah, I did remember really worrying about it, and being concerned. It's like the devil kind of thing, right? I mean, that's another thing I feel like I've really taken with me from foster care is like sometimes just staying in a bad situation is better than moving on because at least kind of what you're getting. But yes, we were always together, and I happen to know for sure that my sisters have a lot to do with my outcome and my resilience and my ability to, feel anchored and relatively sane.
Did you find yourself turning into a little actress in the sense that you gave the audience what they wanted? And whatever the new foster home was, you created that character for them?
You're very perceptive. You're
Thank
very perceptive. Yes, I did find myself doing that. Yes, kind of trying to imagine what those people wanted and then, right, giving it to them. But what I also did was read my way out of every difficult day. I read to survive. I ate my lunch in the library. I could read 2 and 3 books a day. And I just sort of like, put on the world of a book. I often say like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak and just kind of disappeared into worlds. And what I didn't know was that I was making a writer. But even the empathetic imagination, the ability to project ourselves into the minds of others, regardless of how that happens, or even if it's flawed or a survival strategy, does create the ability, you know what I mean, to do that. And it is a writer's tool.
There are many authors who have told us that books saved them,
Yeah.
whether it was the
You
library.
said it would happen, Pam.
See, look. Hello, kitty cat. You're very attractive. We're glad to have you as a guest.
A little levity, a little levity. Yes, he came to say hello. That's Crowley.
Crowley. Hello, Crowley. All right. So Sharon Westifer says, did you ever find your mother? You mentioned talking to your mother.
Yeah, no, I didn't find her. She found us. When I was 20 years old and, aged out, and my sisters and I were all living in the same apartment. We had minimum wage jobs and we're living well below the poverty line, and sort of, we were all in community college. My mother kind of turned up one day, and her mother had recently died, and sort of on her deathbed said that she wanted my mom to find us and make peace. And so she searched us out and took us to dinner. I remember being very suspicious of her, but since then we've had a relationship. It's fraught. It's very complicated. I sometimes people ask me, have you forgiven her? But I don't believe forgiveness is something you do once and then you're over it. It's something we do again and again and again. It's something that we pick up every day and sort of carry further along. So she didn't have a lot of, she didn't have a lot of tools at her disposal. She was a very young woman and she had a lot of things stacked against her. And so I try to understand that when I think about what she carries now. But yeah.
So a lot of your books have been optioned for television, movies, etc.
Yeah.
Have you had much excitement about this one?
Yes, in fact, it was the first time I had multiple offers and got to decide. And not just offers for TV, but also for film, or rather the other way around, not just film, but TV. And so we finally went with a producer who is interested in developing it for television and perhaps as an extended series, not just as a limited series. So that's exciting. And one of my producers actually lives and was raised in Mendocino, which is my town that the book was set in, and sort of lived in Mendocino as a child with a single mom. And when I had my first meeting with him, I could see past his shoulder to the Pacific. And I just thought, well, that's a sign right there that maybe not just that I need to go with him, but that there needs to be a cast party at his fabulous house in the mountains above the Pacific.
All right. You're the casting director. Who are you going to cast as Anna?
I don't know. I knew you were going to ask that. Who's Anna? I think about somebody who has a lot of toughness, but fragility.
Yeah.
Because that's Anna, and she also has this physical competence but just that soft, tough thing. So maybe someone like Amy Adams, who I think has a lot of that. She's got so much going on in her eyes, or like Emily Blunt, like somebody who's really intelligent, but can do vulnerability.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that you did with your character. We tend to see, of course, the male detectives are always the hard-boiled, that tough kind of guy. And sometimes you see the women that are somewhat the same way.
You
But this
do.
character is not that way. She's got a lot of, pardon the pun, heart.
Yeah. I think it's okay. Yeah, that's what I wanted. And I also wanted her to be wrong. I wanted her to be flawed. I wanted her to get in her own way. I wanted her to have stuff to work on, ways in which she was still pretty wounded.
Yeah. All right, we've got a question here from Fran Marshall. Were there sections of the book that were difficult to write because of the emotional weight, or was this book writing it cathartic for you?
Yeah. So I don't, this is what I think about catharsis, or what I've begun to think about catharsis, is that in writing a book like this, yes, maybe it does help me heal, but I also think about the ways that if we tell stories, difficult stories, and kind of puncture the silence that is around some of this subject matter, kind of this too hot to handle subject matter, then, I wrote this article, maybe you saw it, Pam, in the New York Times,
Right.
about my childhood and about, romantic relationships, and about how I made a decision a couple of years ago to basically go cold turkey on romantic relationships. And the title of the piece was, I took a vow of celibacy, which kind of really has nothing to do with sex and much more to do with just stopping, right, exactly where I was, and trying to sift through all of the lessons of my life. And what I found from that piece, well, first of all, I got thousands of letters, and a stronger response than I've ever received from any piece of writing I've ever written, which makes me think that we write sometimes not just for ourselves, but so that someone reading will feel less alone. And when we feel less alone and more connected, we're all better served, right?
We had a couple of people ask, why did you choose Mendocino?
Yeah. Why did I choose Mendocino? So it's one of those places from my past. So I grew up in California in a crap town called Fresno. That's nothing like beautiful, ethereal Mendocino. But when I was in my 20s, I spent time in this town. My sister lived nearby. My younger sister lived nearby. And we hiked a lot of the places I have Anna explore in the book. And it's just one of those places. It's a Victorian village perched on a bluff above the Pacific. It's surrounded by old growth redwood forests. And then the coastal mountains mean that this eerie fog kind of comes in and settles over everything. It's otherworldly. It's so beautiful, but it's the kind of place where you think maybe anything could happen. And to me, when I conceived of these characters, I just thought, the atmosphere had to be just right. And just the natural world too is something that's incredibly important to me. And one of the ways that I, as a child, really found grace and connection and beauty, I think is very healing. And I wanted Anna to have that as well.
It was a great counterbalance to all the ugliness that she.
Yeah, the darkness, right.
Right, for that. Okay. Can you believe it? Our time is almost up. I'm like blown away. All right. So if you want to know more about Paula, you can go to paulamclain.com. She has an Instagram, Paula_McLain, and her Facebook is Paula McLain Author. What is the one thing you want people to take from your book? I mean, if there was one thing you would want them, what would it be?
One thing, that uncomfortable feelings can't kill us, but sometimes silence can. And that perhaps increasing our tolerance for books with difficult subject matter is a way to increase our tolerance and knowledge, breadth of knowledge of other ways of living in the world, and just increasing our empathy, because we never really know what someone is carrying.
Yeah.
Or what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, it's a great thriller story, but it also has some really important information in it that some of us may not be aware of. And
yeah, it has a social conscience, I guess I would say. And I think a book can do all of that. You can write a page-turning thriller that has an emotional core and that has a message that's maybe a little bit deeper. So
yeah,
that's what I meant to do.
well, you, in my opinion, you did it. So I loved the book. All right. We want to say, of course, if you want to know more about Creating Conversations, who is the independent bookseller who helps to put on this event, go to creatingconversations.org. And remember that you can get any of Paula's back books, right? If you haven't gotten The Paris Wife or Circling the Sun or Love and Ruin, or what's the one that you wrote about the family that was a memoir?
It's called Like Family, Growing Up in Other People's Houses. So it's still in print. It was published in 2003 by Little Brown.
Yeah, that's a really important one. And I want to remind you that if you don't have the book, you'll get a $5 credit on any of the books of Paula's for tonight. There's a code, it's in the chat for you. And again, the book plates, if you order a book, you'll get a book plate as long as they last. And if you already have a book and don't have a book plate, you can email Lauren, and that's in the chat box as well. And of course, you know what I'm going to ask you is, are you going to come back sometime and talk on the next book?
I would love to. If I can do it in person, please.
Well, that would be up to our wonderful chair, Barbara, because she's the one that makes sure that the event happens.
Keep writing. We're interested. Keep writing. Thank you, Paula. And thank you, Pam.
Yeah, Pam, you were incredible. Thank you so much. And thanks to Terry as well, and just to all of you for tuning in tonight. It's been a really rich and rewarding conversation.
You've got a great story, and we have a lot that we can learn from you, as well as enjoy your books. So what could be more than that? We want to say thank you to everybody, but of course we want to say thank you to Literary Women of Long Beach and Creating Conversations, but most of all, of course, Paula, thank you. I'm Pam Atherton.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.